One of the children actually called me Nana, and that made me feel, I felt comfortable. When he called me Nana, I thought, oh, he's not seeing me as a person above, he saw me as an equal, as his Nana. So it was nice.
I found Generation Wiser a very interesting experience. The children have been wonderful. I don't have grandchildren, and these are like my pseudo-grandchildren. I've enjoyed working with the kids, and they've been so well behaved, listened to what we say, and we've just done lots of things, and I'm hoping that the children have enjoyed it as well, because we've enjoyed doing it with them.
My name's Jackson and I'm 6 years old. I'm Mila Palmer and I'm 6. My name is Christopher and I'm 6 years old. I've been making animals and making some silly hats. They teach me how to tie really hard knots. I just like getting my hands messy. So now I'm getting up my hands and around and around and around and around and around and around. And it was very fun. My favourite part is making the owls.
I've enjoyed every Tuesday that I've come in. It's like my second family. Yeah, it's very, very entertaining.
High gets the ball down towards pass surface.
5 games, Essendon needed to start well. Izzard found Mann on the first.
You look up with those angel eyes. I remember what I'm fighting for. Oh, the victory cannot be denied.
Oh, I can remember back in the 60s I came down to Windy Hill with my father to watch Essendon and Richmond play football, and I can remember standing in the outer up on the hill and just surrounded by so many people I couldn't see a thing. You know, there were just people everywhere, and what I remember more than anything was just the tribal noises that came out of the crowd. It was just amazing, just amazing.
I remember as a kid, 16 years old, walking to the ground to watch the footy, and just the roar of the crowd, and just the big crowd that it was, or were in those days. Always got the big crowds here. It's just always something that's always stayed in my memory, I guess.
I've got childhood memories of coming here, watching football and watching cricket. Like many other, teenage sports kids in the area, I was able to play some junior football matches here as a kid.
It's the sporting hub of Essendon. You've got football, cricket, bowls, croquet, you've got the swimming pool, it's health and fitness.
Settle down a while. Tell me everything you're praying for. Oh, the answer will not be denied. No, the answer will not be denied. Every day when the sun rises.
But it's like an oasis in the suburbs.
I've been here for 140 years. It's certainly a space that's absolutely loved by our community.
Sport's such a fantastic part of any community, and it includes people from all sorts of backgrounds as well and brings them together. And for me, Windy Hill has always been the epicentre of that community spirit here in the municipality.
There's always something going on, there's always people on the oval, there's always activities. It's just a good place to be around.
Well, I think most of the members, most of the residents of Essendon don't realise what an asset they have here. And it's really, when you think about how many members there are in the croquet club, the bowls club, the cricket club, there are really a lot of people using these facilities, but we've got space for more.
So tonight we have the inaugural first ever Rose Street Neighbours Night Out, which is a really special event. It's been a pretty tricky year. A lot's gone down in this neighbourhood. Tensions there between whether rail was going over or under or how that all works. And look, mostly it's built now. It's been a pretty hard year for the traders, but they're amazing and it's really brought them together. And they've survived in a way that the council and the traders have got together to celebrate and to really think and more than celebrate, help create what this space is going to be, not just for them, but for the whole of Moonee Valley.
Tell us, what do you love about working on Rose Street?
Just sense of community.
Everyone's on a first name basis. We know what everyone gets up to. Everyone knows each other's business.
It's quite nice and open and relaxed, so I think that for sure.
And people here are absolutely lovely.
And how fantastic is it to actually have this road closed and be able to celebrate with each other and with our neighbours and our local traders here. I think it's fantastic.
We can be a lot louder if you want. Don't worry. It's a great time.
Don't worry, it's loud, yeah.
Welcome everyone to the ordinary meeting of Council for this, the 23rd of April 2019, which is now open. A warm welcome to members of the public gallery who are here tonight at the Civic Centre, and also thank you to those watching at home via live stream. Welcome. As well as being live streamed, the recording of this meeting will also be available on our website, so attendees in the gallery are advised that their presence may be recorded. And I'd also ask that mobile phones please be switched off or to silent mode during the meeting. On behalf of Moonee Valley City Council, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, spirits, community members, ancestors past and present. I would also like to extend this respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. Councillors, as you are aware, Councillor Nation and Councillor Cusack have approved leave of absence for this meeting. I have also received an apology from Councillor Sypek for tonight's meeting. So, councillors, can I please have a motion that the apology be noted? Councillor Byrne, thank you. Seconder, both one at the same time. Councillor Sorais. Any questions? Thank you. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Councillors, can I please have a mover and a seconder that the minutes from the ordinary meeting of Council held on Tuesday the 9th of April 2019 be confirmed? Councillor Lawrence. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Gatchimorici. Thank you. Any questions? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Does any councillor have a conflict of interest in any item on the agenda this evening? That's no. Councillors, do we have any presentations tonight? I don't believe that we do. But we have received one petition to be tabled tonight. So, councillors, can I please have a councillor present the petition and move the motion? Councillor Marshall.
Thanks, Mayor. Council has received a petition with 14 signatures from residents of Duncan Street in Flemington, and the petitioners are requesting that Council consider traffic management and street closures for all events held at the Flemington Racecourse or the showgrounds when scheduled to end in the evening, either at or after 6 p.m. So I'd like to move that Council resolves to 1, receive and note the petition, 2, refer this matter to the Director of Planning and Development for investigation and reporting back to Council, and 3, advise the petition organiser accordingly.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Sorais. Thank you. Any questions? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's unanimously carried. Thank you. We now come to public question time, and as we have not received any questions from the community for tonight's meeting, I'll move on to the agenda item, which is reports from special committees, and there's none of those tonight, which leads us to the first report on tonight's agenda, which is a planning application at 14 Walker Street, Moonee Ponds. Councillors, do I have a motion, please? Councillor Marshall.
Mayor, I'd like to move that Council defer consideration of this report to the next ordinary Council meeting.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Lawrence, thank you. Any questions? No? Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to the motion?
There's just some additional information that needs to be clarified, I think, before councillors can make an informed decision about this particular application.
Thank you. Councillor Lawrence, would you like to speak to the motion?
Not in any detail, just to endorse what Councillor Marshall has just said, that we certainly need to clarify a few issues and bring it back to Council so we can make an informed decision.
Thank you. Would any other councillor like to speak to the item? I shall put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. The next report on tonight's agenda is titled Airport West Station. Councillors, do I have a motion? Councillor Sorais.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to move the officer's recommendation as printed in the report.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Byrne. Thank you. Any questions, councillors? Councillor Sorais, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I will refer to a report that was submitted to the council following on from this wonderful proposal that's put onto the papers tonight, and it's being the traffic and transport portfolio holder. It's something that's been passionate in my agenda for the last couple of years. The need for public transport provision in this area has long been recognised as a key issue since as early as the last century. Records have shown that the matter was raised in Parliament in 1927 during the 1930s and again during the 1950s. Matter was raised in detail during parliamentary debates by the state member of Niddrie back on the 27th of April 1976. The member referred to the deficiencies in transport services in Niddrie with 100,000 people who live with no trains and practically no trams, and we all know that nothing has changed since then. The need for a station has been a consistent theme in Council's adopted policies, including the Integrated Transport Strategy in 2008. Both the state and Commonwealth governments have each made a commitment to the Melbourne Airport Rail Link, also known as MARL, and the state government has also committed to a suburban rail loop, SRL, and these proposed rail projects are set to be built within the Albion Broadmeadows Rail Corridor, passing through Airport West Keilor Park. The Western Gateway Station Site and associated Airport West Precinct, known as AWSP, is located on the rail corridor next to the Calder Freeway, Western Ring Road interchange, halfway between Sunshine and the MAP. The feasibility study recommends that the state and Commonwealth governments make following commitments to ensure the design of the MARL, SRL and other rail projects in the Albion Broadmeadows corridor does not preclude a potential future station at Airport West. That it investigates the benefits and costs of such a station in the potential railway projects in the corridor, including MARL and SRL, and build a station on the standard gauge tracks to be served by the existing service to and from Albury-Wodonga each day. It further goes on to say that the feasibility of a new station at Keilor Park, Airport West, at a site immediately northwest of the Western Ring Road and Calder Freeway interchange. Notionally, this site is referred to as the Western Gateway Station. The study found the proposed station site would provide the following benefits: ease traffic and parking congestion at Melbourne Airport and Sunshine, providing a type of pressure release valve for when those two locations are getting overwhelmed with cars. Improve public transport access for staff working at MAP, Westfield Airport West, Essendon Fields and in surrounding industrial precincts. Transform public transport access in the Western region. Encourage more people to use public transport when visiting MAP. Align with global best practice with regard to airport railway lines by providing connection to the airport's employee catchments. Provide a logical site for key worker, affordable housing with good transport access to significant employment locations, and improve equity in Melbourne's West by providing transport choice to local residents. I think all in all, this is a must that has to be pursued and advocated on behalf of this council. And we all know that there are elections coming up, so I would sincerely hope that we get a favourable outcome, whoever wins that election, and that in Airport West, as I said, this has been on the books for a century, so it needs to be looked into. And we all know that both levels of government at federal and state have looked into this issue and put significant funds in for business case studies, and I would hope that we get a favourable outcome for the community within Airport West. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Soares. Councillor Byrne, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. Well, we've sat in this chamber quite a few times and spoken about the strong support for improved transport within the Airport West vicinity, and by advocating for a train station at Airport West, it would neatly fill the gap between the Craigieburn and Sunbury train corridors. In the recommendation that Councillor Soares has put forward, it obviously says we want to be writing to the members of Parliament and reconfirm our advocacy. In the report, when you read through it, actually, it's quite interesting to look at the short, medium, and long-term goals of having the station at the Airport West. And one thing that hasn't necessarily been spoken about heaps in this chamber has been the need for the commuter park and ride and for the local bus services. So it's about not necessarily just saying we've got a train station here, let's everyone just use it to and from the airport, because obviously there's the airport rail link and the suburban rail loop. But it's about over the immediate term, having this space as a commuter park and ride, and particularly picking up the bus routes that could go to Essendon Fields, Westfield Shopping Centre, Essendon Station and DFO. That will help ease some of the congestion within the Sunshine Station and ease some of the parking issues that we have at Essendon Station, because as we know there's very limited parking up in and around Rose and Flower and that vicinity. These projects, the suburban rail loop and the airport rail link, will be costing the state an awful lot of money and will be greatly improving the infrastructure, and we need to ensure that council is and that the residents of Moonee Valley are getting some benefit, and that's why we're basically saying we want to safeguard this particular site in the short term whilst everything is going on, so that in the future there can be that station. It's also really interesting looking through the report and it being comparing other airport rail links to other cities within the world. They talk about London, and they talk about and why that works, because there's many stops to be able to pick up not just tourists but to actually pick up the people who live locally. And there's another one in terms of why Brisbane doesn't necessarily work, because there's not enough stops. So I think by using some of this evidence, we're really asking the state government and the federal government to invest in a business case about why some airport rail links and suburban loops may or may not work, or how they can be better. And we think that by putting in this extra station, it will be greatly advantageous to residents of Moonee Valley. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Byrne. Would any other councillor like to speak to this motion? Councillor Marshall?
Thanks, Mayor. And I'm happy to speak in support of the motion. And I think I've previously expressed my view that I think we're unlikely to be successful as part of the MAL, and I've had that view for some time. But what I like about this is, again, we're going down the Plan B option, and I really hope that we put a significant amount of advocacy into getting right there in on the ground for the SRL project, which is in its absolute infancy, and now is the time to be able to really use the evidence and the information we've gathered to date. If we're unsuccessful in convincing the state and federal government to have another station as part of the MAL. But certainly that idea of creating that ability to move from suburb to suburb, cross suburbs in a way that you can't at the moment, and given our growing north and west, if it doesn't happen as part of the MAL, it absolutely needs to happen as part of the SRL. So we have a potentially long path ahead of us, and it will be future councillors that continue this work. But to me, this is planting what is an incredibly important seed, and if this council and future councils get the advocacy, get the evidence right, then I feel confident that we will see a station at Airport West. Importantly too, obviously, is preserving the option, and that's as much as anything what this has got to be about at this stage, and not knocking out that option or not making it so incredibly expensive that it just won't be feasible. So the report was interesting, raised a few things, and I acknowledge Councillor Byrne's point too about that balancing point between having the appropriate numbers of commuters, but also not having a meandering journey through Melbourne, which will not be something that will necessarily be particularly attractive to tourists. So it's certainly going to be interesting when the business case is developed, and we will all be looking at it with very close eyes.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. The next report is 10.3, and it is regarding our Timor-Leste partnership agreements. The Councillors, do I have a motion, please? Councillor Marshall.
Thanks, Mayor. Mayor, I'd like to move that Council resolves to A, endorse funding of $5,000 excluding GST in the 2018-19 financial year to the Expand Foundation to deliver a community farming project as outlined in Attachment D from the Timor-Leste program account. B, endorse funding of $5,000 excluding GST in the 2018-19 financial year to Health Alliance International to support the purchase of hospital staff training equipment for the Likusa Community Health Centre project as outlined in Attachment E from the Timor-Leste program account. C, note this funding forms part of a 2-year funding agreement with the Expand Foundation and Health Alliance International as outlined in Table 1, and that Council's funding in the 2019-20 financial year is subject to receipt of satisfactory project acquittals for 2018-19 activity.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Byrne. Thank you. Any questions, councillors? No? Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thanks, Mayor. It's a shame that Councillor Cusack isn't here in some ways, because I know this is something that he has been incredibly passionate about for many years now, but it's interesting when you look at the report and you note that the relationship between Moonee Valley Council and Likusa now stands about 15 years, which is a very impressive commitment and partnership that we have. Last year we conducted a review in relation to the program, and coming out of that review, I suppose we decided to put a bit more meat around the bones of the project and to have a better framework in place, which I think again is important if we're looking at allocating money. Really importantly too, out of that review came that real indication that this ongoing support is very much needed and it's very much valued, which I think we should all be very proud of. And it also talked about the importance of making sure that we partner with local associations and local organisations to get the most value out of the programs that we support. You can look at some of the things in the report that Council has supported over time, and they're just incredibly valuable programs. Really simple things in some ways, but things that have derived so much value for the people of Likusa. There was an upgrade of a school and recently smartphones for maternal child health nurses, which again is something that we take for granted, but not everyone else does. So we've received 2 partnership applications here and there as outlined in the proposed motion. A community farming project to harvest vanilla, a particular type of vanilla, and with funding to purchase a vehicle to help do that, farm that and harvest it. And then there's also the proposal relating to the purchase of hospital equipment, which will help increase staff training and their ability to deal with obstetric and newborn emergencies. So as noted in the proposed motion, this will come out of the existing fund which we have there, and also note to very kindly officers proposing to undertake fundraising activities with staff, which I think is really valuable and I think is a wonderful initiative. So I hope councillors will see fit to support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Councillor Byrne, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Mayor. As Councillor Marshall put, it is a shame that Councillor Cusack isn't here, as he has been a great supporter of this project for many years. Councillor Cusack visited East Timor along with a member of Council's exec team back in 2010, and at that stage we did recommit to a further 10-year friendship with the people of East Timor. So it sounds like it was quite a productive visit, and obviously we're still in that time frame. And as Councillor Marshall put before, we did need to somewhat restructure how we were doing things, which is what we came to somewhat of an agreement with last year, and this is the projects that have been put forward. They're great projects, and I like them because they're somewhat sustainable. So it's not like we're giving something that will eventually run out. We're giving something that, what's the saying, you give a person a fish and they eat for a day, you teach a person to fish and they'll eat for a lifetime. And I feel like this is what these projects are. There will be lots and lots of benefits out of their vanilla harvesting and the support for the maternal, child and health. So in 2020 or 2021, obviously there'll be another review of the program and how we go forward, but I think this is really exciting to see how these go for the next couple of years. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other councillor like to speak to this motion? Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Look, I'm impressed by the project. My concern is the funding that's coming out of the biannual grants program over 2018, 19 and 19, 20. And obviously it's not a local community project, that's telling you the obvious. And that is a concern for especially those organisations within our community that miss out on grants and see this as slightly incestuous. It's a council project, council officers involved, and therefore we're using ratepayers' funding to subsidise a program that at the expense of potentially a project that a local community could be benefiting from. And I think of some of the organisations that have lost or missed out on funding for the past few years, and I can think of pensioner groups, choral societies, bowls clubs, kinders, St John's Ambulance to name one, churches and other community groups within Moonee Valley that will not be getting funding because we're redirecting some of our biennial grants to this fund. So it begs the question, should we be doing that? There is funds available within the funding program that we have already set aside at 20,000 odd. I can't remember the exact figure, but and I'm just wondering whether that could be the use for the 5,000 for each of the next 2 years at least, and we can review it after that. So personally, I don't mind the program. I realise East Timor is a local neighbour of Australia and needs our support, and that through other organisations I've supported them as well. So, however, I just don't want to see biannual grants that are specifically put aside for local community projects being redirected at the expense of local organisations. So I'll leave it at that. If this motion doesn't get up, then I would be looking at shadowing an alternative motion, Madam Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Any other councillor? Councillor Gatchimochi?
Just a point of clarification, Madam Mayor. Obviously the motion on our screen may not be the same one. I'm just seeking confirmation from Councillor Marshall. I believe the motion that Councillor Marshall moved took it all from the Timor Fund.
Mm-hmm. That's, yes.
So is that all from the Timor Fund? Thank you. Is that for each year, the 2018, 19, 20?
The way that proposed motion is reading is the 18-19 is from the Timor Fund, and the 19-20 is as per table in the recommendation, which would allocate $2,000 from the biannual grants account. If you after that point of clarification, I'm happy for Ms. Rita to confirm that point of clarification. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, that is correct, that the following year $2,000 would be out of the grants program. However, that can be brought back through the grants program and addressed in that forum if councillors would like to reconsider that idea at that time, rather than go through a formal amendment. Sorry. I missed some of what you said, but does that answer your point of clarification, Councillor Gatchimochi?
Just another point of clarification. So I'm just not understanding the change in your wording you're suggesting, Ms. Sarita.
Thank you. And through you, Madam Mayor, just that the resolution as it stands is for the current year to come totally out of the Timor-Leste account. Next year, 2,000 could come out of the grants account as per that resolution, but that is also something that could be reviewed by the grants committee and us to address it through a subsequent standard report rather than have to go through the formal amendment process.
So is it one or the other? I'm just not clear. Is it through the grants committee or is it through council making a decision here?
The report, as the resolutions as it stands, is for all of it to come out of the Timor-Leste account this year, and next year for 2,000 to come out of the grants account, and $8,000 out of the Timor-Leste account. I was just trying to find a way forward for councillors without the formal amendment process.
So, as the mover of the motion, Mayor, my intention in moving the motion would be that $2,000 would go through the standard biannual grants process as that we usually have. So in the 2019-20 financial year, yep.
So just to confirm the point of clarifications, the proposed motion is just as Ms. Writer mentioned, or from the Timor-Leste account, funding account, and next year would be as per the table which takes it from the biennial grants program, but it still has to go through the biennial grants program as the mover just mentioned. Does that provide enough clarification for all councillors?
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Did you wish to continue, Councillor Gatchie? No. Any other councillor wish to speak to that motion? Okay. Councillor Marshall, would you like to close? Okay. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is the Water Sensitive Urban Design Developer Voluntary Contribution Scheme. So councillors, do I have a motion, please? Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll move a motion in the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Do I have a seconder for that, please? Don't second. Could I have a seconder for that motion? Unless you need to add a point before you get a seconder, Councillor Lawrence?
I would like to add a dot. Can I add a dot point? I just want a clarification on all of this. I can. Thank you.
You don't have a seconder yet, so.
Okay, I'll just grab that dot point from Councillor Marshall.
With a report reviewing the scheme.
You was writing that a doctor.
To be brought back to council. Sorry. So I said with a report reviewing the scheme to be brought back to council 12 months post-implementation and the appropriateness of the rate to be reviewed annually.
I might let my motion lapse, if I may, Madam Mayor.
Okay. I'll find another mover for that motion. Councillor Marshall, move that. What motion would you like to move,
It will be
Councillor
very
Marshall?
similar to the motion moved by Councillor Lawrence. So in the form of the officer's recommendation, but after the word scheme, where it appears the second time in the motion, with the insertion of the following words, with a report reviewing the scheme to be brought back to council 12 months post-implementation and the appropriateness of the rate to be reviewed annually.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Lawrence, thank you. Are there any questions, councillors? No. Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thanks, Mayor. And I have moved this motion having read all of the information, I suppose I would say that I probably cautiously support this idea. In 2013, Council introduced water-sensitive urban design provisions into our planning scheme, and they were really important because they introduced best practice requirements to our planning scheme around stormwater management, and particularly designed to stop pollution entering our waterways and also to look at ways that would hopefully reduce mains water usage. And for the most part, they're satisfied by people putting tanks, rainwater tanks, we have rainwater gardens and some various other measures that can be put in place to actually achieve compliance with those relevant provisions of the planning scheme. The report indicates, so obviously this has now been in place for some time and our officers have been reviewing how that implementation has gone, and for the most part people who are developing land can get about 80% of the way to compliance by popping in a rainwater tank, and they're plumbed to the toilets, so that's a very positive thing. But we've often found that people have difficulty in having that additional 20% compliance. And when you look at rainwater gardens, they can be expensive and fiddly to implement, and from my understanding there aren't that many people who actually have the expertise around designing them. They can be very expensive, and the difficulty is, again, you can put them in place, but obviously if they're not maintained, then they ultimately defeats the purpose of having these water sensitive urban design principles in place. So there's been issues with the actual compliance, but also the maintenance going forward. So officers have commissioned some work which has indicated that from a cost effective point of view, that it's probably actually better for council to do medium to larger scale projects rather than having all of these individual smaller projects done on site, and that the actual cost effective point of view, the benefits achieved by the community are greater if that actually occurs. So what we're proposing to introduce through this motion is a voluntary scheme, and that's really important because it is voluntary. We don't have to go through the usual planning scheme amendment processes that we know take 1,001 years and can be quite difficult at times. But again, as the report indicates, there's been initial indications to sort of give some sort of sense that this probably will have a relatively high uptake, because people will make that choice to give us a contribution in lieu of having to comply on site. There's probably a couple of things that it's worth actually mentioning. We're not the first council to do this, and probably we should give some thanks to Kingston Council for having gone through that process and probably ironed out a few of the wrinkles in doing so, and sharing their learnings with us. So that's really valuable, and it's great to see councils collaborate that kind of way. As I mentioned, it's voluntary, but it also too, there still needs to be 80% compliance on site, and that's really important. We're not turning around saying, oh, you can just, don't worry about that anymore, just give us money. It's not the way this scheme works. Most of the compliance will still have to be done on site, but for the bit that really probably does not provide much effectiveness to the greater community, applicants can provide, if they choose to, a rate based on per square metre of impervious area. There's been quite a lot of work done on getting the right rate, because obviously you get it too low, you don't get the value, you get it too high, you don't have people come into the scheme. So it will be important to review that and see how it works, and to make sure that we've actually got that rate right and that our community is deriving the value that they should. But what this will help us do as a council will be some of the bigger projects, and they're mentioned in the report. There's a project from every ward, which is nice to see. We will be actually co-funded by council contributions, help bring these projects to fruition probably sooner, hopefully, than what they otherwise would be, which I think is really important. We will need to again go through the usual budget processes to fund the projects, but to have this contribution system in place will be of great assistance. I think one of the important things is, unlike maybe some other schemes we've had, that we will really need to commit to spending this money, not just let it be piling away in an account somewhere. And That's why it's important to have a 12-month post-implementation review to see how it's going, to see whether we've struck the right balance and we aren't just allowing people to get out cheaply. Sorry, Mayor, I'm almost finished. But that review will enable us to make sure we've struck the right balance and that the program is working to ultimately provide a greater benefit to our community and to our waterways.
Thank you. Councillor Marshall. Councillor Lawrence, would you like to speak to the motion?
I will, thank you, Madam Mayor. And can I say that the beauty of this scheme is the flexibility it gives both council and also the developer in the Moonee Valley area. That 20% doesn't sound like a huge amount when you think of there's another 80% that's still got to be installed in terms of the water system for each developer. But it does take away that 20% extra obligation to try and produce something out of nothing that probably is basic to the nth degree anyway. And this provides that developer with that option to say, look, I voluntarily don't want to do that extra 20%. I'm happy to pay the per square metre cost to council for something for the greater good of the community. And that's going to be a larger water harvesting type program such as the one that's in Napier Park in Buckley Ward, which has huge tanks down one end of the park and it gets recycled back into the park and keeps the park green and obviously using rainwater that would have otherwise gone down the drain, literally. So Woodlands Park is another one that's coming on Council's agenda for the future for water harvesting, and I'm sure there's other parks in the Capital Works program. So all of these funds that will be gathered from developers that choose to voluntarily take the 20% option will be able to do that, and those funds will be set aside and used for parkland and for the betterment of our local community. And given we're about to be in the shortlist, well, we are on the shortlist for the World Wellbeing award in Canada, this will only add value to our local residents and to our local Moonee Valley. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Any other councillor wish to speak to this motion? No? Okay, I shall put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. The next agenda item is 10.5 and it is the Assembly of Councillors. Councillors, can I have a motion please? Councillor Race.
Move the recommendation.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that please? Councillor Byrne, thank you. Any questions, councillors? No? Councillor Race, would you like to speak to the motion?
No, it's just procedural. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Byrne, would you like to speak? Any other councillor wish to speak? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. The next item is notices of motion, and we have one notice of motion tonight, and I'd like to now call on Councillor Lawrence to present his notice of motion entitled Lincoln Park.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Notice of motion report number 2019/12, Lincoln Park. Take notice at the ordinary meeting of Council to be held the 23rd of April 2019. It is my intention to move the Council investigate, confirm and report on the accuracy of historical information relating to the likelihood that the parkland currently known as Lincoln Park in Buckley Ward, Essendon, was previously used as an Aboriginal ceremonial ground by the Wurundjeri people and other Aboriginal peoples, and that the Council officers consult with the Wurundjeri people and other stakeholders to confirm further knowledge and deepen our understanding in relation to this possible important historical Aboriginal ceremonial ground in Essendon. And further, that Council officers report back to Council on any historical information and recommend, if required, any action to be taken regarding a recognition plaque or other recognition as would be appropriate for such an Aboriginal historical ceremonial ground site.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Marshall, thank you. Are there any questions regarding this motion? Councillor Lawrence, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I take great pleasure in speaking to this item. At a recent Thanksgiving breakfast in Essendon held at Windy Hill on April 13th, Moonee Valley residents heard a guest speaker, Professor Graham Davison AO from Monash University School of Philosophy and History and International Studies. During his fascinating talk, Professor Davison was reflecting on his time growing up around the Lincoln Park area and mentioned that he believed that Lincoln Park was an Aboriginal ceremonial ground from his historical records that he knew about. Anyway, cut a long story short, Professor Davison sent me some emails, having followed up with discussions with him, supporting evidence, and if I can just read from one of those documents, which I happen to have here, and this is from the Royal Historical Society collection of Victoria, and it just is just an excerpt from one of the manuscripts. I won't go into all the details, but suffice to say, I'll just read from it. And this is some of the scenes described by the RHSV manuscripts, unique in including detailed recounting of George Bishop of a corroboree held at Essendon, Melbourne. And I quote from George Bishop: "I have witnessed several corroborees between 8 and 14, but the one before last in 1868 saw two northern tribes from Ballarat and Bendigo coming from different routes arriving in Essendon at the same time. As they were friendly, they camped near one another, and Mr. Jameson and others asked them for their usual display, and they gave a double performance." Remembering the time that this was written, of course. "First the men and then the lubras. A very large number of residents were present, and as I have a retentive memory and have preserved my notes, I will give a description of the dance and its surroundings. It took place about halfway between Lincoln Road and Mount Alexander Road on the other side of the first two gullies, and I'll describe those two gullies to you in a minute, at 8 p.m. on a dark night, as the moon would spoil the effect. The spot chosen was where three large gum trees were chosen together facing east. They placed saplings against the tree to the height of 8 to 10 feet and 2 feet apart, and covered them very thickly with boughs which had left a fine dark background. They had two large stacks of wood about 30 feet apart, ready to light as soon as they began to dance." So the two gullies, as I understand it, and knowing this area fairly well, there's a gully that runs down Washington Street from the top end of near St Teresa's, and there's also another gully in that area running down from Shamrock Street. Now, they're both quite obvious to the topography of the area, and of course, if you go beyond that, you're virtually into Lincoln Park. So it leads to believe that these historical records are reasonably accurate. However, I don't want to make assumptions that I'm not sure of, and so I will leave it to council officers. But the point being that this is a recount of a corroboree, obviously, that happened in Essendon, which is important in itself, and that here's a local resident who's describing something that happened in our backyard, and speaking with the professor at further length, he's of the opinion that the corroboree happened, and also that the original people who did the titling and land titling I'm talking about in that area of Lincoln Park were leaving that area as a reservation because the Aboriginal people of the Wurundjeri and other groups that met there were part of that area. So it's interesting, the historical perspective. Now, of course, I don't know any more other than what I've been given. So again, I'm just making the recommendation at this point the council officers investigate it, and we come back with some further information, and hopefully a recommendation that Lincoln Park is an Aboriginal ceremonial ground. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Marshall, would you like to speak to the motion?
I'm happy to speak in support of the motion, and I think it's great that Councillor Lawrence has brought this to the chamber. We as a council, both past councils and this council, have done significant amounts of work which are designed in some ways to reflect and acknowledge the history of white Australia. And we've certainly, even if you look at the heritage work that we're doing, enormous amounts of detailed work and analysis of properties and the history of those properties. We have not done as much work on the history of the first Australians, and if we have a potentially important site that was of significance to our first Australians, such as Lincoln Park, I think it's incredibly important that we work out as much as we can to sort of collate as much information that we possibly can in consultation with the Wurundjeri people, and to the extent that we could recognise something like that in our own backyard, if you like, I think it would be wonderful. And I really find something like this quite exciting because you never know what's going to come out of it. And I certainly will look forward to seeing what officers in consultation with the Wurundjeri people and the other stakeholders that officers have really close connections with. I look forward to seeing what they can uncover.
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Any other councillor like to speak to this motion? I shall put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. The next item of business is urgent business, and we do not have any item. Oh, do we have any items of urgent business? No. Do any councillors have anything they'd like to report on in their roles as delegates? No. So that brings us to our next item of business, which is confidential reports, and there is one confidential report this evening. So, councillors, can I have a motion that the meeting be closed to the public under Section 89(2)(d) of the Local Government Act 1989 to consider confidential reports? Councillor Sorais, thank you. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Lawrence, thank you. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. So this is where we say goodnight to members of the public gallery and those watching via live stream. Thank you for your interest in tonight's meeting, and we hope to see you in 2 weeks' time. Thank you.